the presenter Dan Wootten has been suspended, along with Laurence Fox, over the actor and Reclaim Party leader's sexist and derogatory comments about a journalist, Ava Santina Evans.
Yeah, his comments made Ava feel physically sick, and the channel has said they are now conducting a full investigation. We're going to speak to Ava, as well as former Labour Special Advisor Aisha Hazarika and former Conservative parliamentary candidate Ali Miraj in just a moment.
Both those broadcasters now suspended from GB News. Ava, I asked you before we broadcast that if it was OK for you to see that again. But actually, looking at you now, I just wonder whether actually it kind of makes it worse again.
It just sort of feels like an out-of-body experience, looking at it. It's like a skit from the 1980s or something like that. I don't think I've ever been spoken to or about like that in my whole journalistic career. I honestly am astounded that it was broadcast.
The comments were coming because you'd made a comment about there being a minister for men, and that was a reaction to that, and they were reacting to what you had said on a different programme and a different area, and all of a sudden you've been thrown into the middle of the two of them.
Or targeted.
And targeted for something you've said. I can't begin to imagine what that's been like for you to find yourself in the middle of that, Ava.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd argued on another programme is there should be a minister for mental health because of the soaring rates of male suicide and also because of, you know, young children with mental health issues. But I mean, I don't even think that those comments are about me. I think they're about a character or a person that doesn't quite exist, like a fabrication, this sort of uber-feminist, woke character who hates men, a young blonde woman. None of those things are me or, you know, are individual to me. But they're a very good vehicle, I suppose, for attacking and making light of on a programme.
And sorry, since they did that interview as well, and they've both been suspended, there's an investigation underway. What's been the impact on you, particularly from their supporters? I
mean, I'm deeply embarrassed by all of it, and I'm very appreciative for everyone who has very kindly stood up for me, but it's sort of the other side of it, which is half of the comments are very lovely and supportive, and then the other side are very threatening. I'm somehow part of this global agenda that is trying to bring down men, and I hate all men, and therefore I need to watch my back and be very careful because there are certain people who now are threatening to come after me. Sorry, it feels ridiculous even saying it, but yeah, I mean, my direct messages on social media are full of people threatening me.
And have you reported those to the police?
I haven't yet. It's only been a day, and I'm still sort of trying to get my head around all of it. But I mean, reading them, it's just honestly astounding. I mean, most of the time I cover trade unions and picket lines, and now I feel like I've been thrown into something that is just so ridiculous and hyperbolic and nothing to do with me, really.
Yesterday, we asked the Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser, specifically about this. This is what she had to say.
Well, of course, those comments were unacceptable, as you said, and GB News have apologised for that. We have a regulator. That regulator is Ofcom, and I'm sure that they'll be looking into this.
Does that make you feel reassured? I mean, the Culture Secretary saying simply they're unacceptable, I'm not sure went quite far enough.
Yeah, well, no. I mean, imagine if, you know, she had to explain to her dad, like I had to yesterday, why I was on the news and why I was in the papers, and it was because some man was speaking to me in that derogatory fashion. If it was her daughter or if it was herself, I think she'd feel very differently.
Have you had apologies from GB News?
I did have an apology. I had an apology late afternoon, and it made sense because they were working on the suspension of Dan Wootten. They just said that it didn't reflect the rest of the views on the channel, and I'm sure that's true to a degree. I think they've got a political output, a political editor who is very talented, but there is certainly a line of a narrative that is pervasive after 10 o'clock on that channel that I just don't think is safe for women to watch, consume or be around.
The other thing that we spoke to the Culture Secretary about was whether it's appropriate for Conservative MPs, particularly one as senior as the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, to appear, well, either on a news channel at all, but specifically on a channel which then broadcasts that content. Do you think that people like Lee Anderson and I think Jacob Rees-Mogg and Esther McVeigh, Philip Davies, they should be on GB News?
I think what's important is a lot of presenters and producers at the channel spoke publicly yesterday about how they don't align themselves with those views, but I didn't hear that from any of the members of Parliament or the elected members of Parliament that sit on that channel. And so if you're not going to say anything and you're going to continue broadcasting on it, it's almost as if you've accepted it, or you're claiming to align with those views. You're saying that it's perfectly reasonable for someone to profess what Laurence Fox did that night.
Dan Wootton has apologised and posted an apology, but then Laurence Fox has since shown some messages that they've shared between the two of them, saying honesty is the best policy, suggesting that Dan Wootton's apology, well, that was his reaction, was they were communicating post the interview.
It looked like they were laughing about it afterwards from the state of the direct message. Have you seen that, Ava?
Yeah, which is, I mean, really interesting. It was brought to my attention yesterday. Actually, quite immediately after, I was saying to my colleagues that Dan Wootton had reached out to try and apologise to me, and he'd said that it was an accident and he regretted it. And
it was an accident?
Yes, and that he didn't quite realise what Laurence Fox was saying during the broadcast, and so that's how it, how it had all come to happen. And then that screenshot sort of invalidates all of that apology.
Look, let's talk about the broader issue here. Aisha, when you're a woman in the media, you are on the receiving end of some pretty unpleasant sexualised comments. But mainly it happens online. This was on a news channel. And, obviously the channel has stepped in, apologised, there's going to be an Ofcom investigation. It's 2023. Why is this still happening?
Because sexism and misogyny is still absolutely endemic in our society. And I would say this is not a new thing. The thing that I found so depressing about the whole thing is that you would have thought that things would have changed, and they haven't. Women in the public eye, and women who are not even in the public eye, are subject to this base. You get reduced to your body parts and what a man would like to do to them. That is what your worth is. How, I'm not even going to say the word XXX, are you? That's what it comes down to. And, if you're lucky, someone will be like, oh, I want to X you. And if you're not lucky, you're too ugly, you're too old, or maybe you don't want to do that with him, which means you're ugly and there's a threat of violence after that. I think people have no idea what it is like, not just for women in the public eye, but for other women as well. We think we've advanced. And by the way, politicians get this all the time. It's been going on for ages. My former boss, Harriet Harman, Rod Little wrote a shocking piece about her many years ago that he then apologised for. You look at that speech that Julia Gillard made about the misogyny she faces. Women, sadly, get this all the time. We think we've made advances, and actually it boils down to something which is so incredibly base. You are reduced to sex and the act of sex and what some bloke thinks he can do to you. That's where your worth is.
I mean, Ali, people would have those opinions in the past, and those opinions could be kept in a sort of an area where they can share them with like-minded people. But this is a platform that broadcasts strong political views, current affairs, all sorts of things. The fact that Laurence Fox was able to discuss these things, by all accounts, he spoke to the producers beforehand. They understood the essence of what he was going to say, not necessarily the words he was going to use, but the essence of what he was going to say before he did that live broadcast. The host did nothing to stop him, to try and make it clear that that's not acceptable. So all of a sudden, those things that Aisha's clearly talking about are being broadcast in a really public arena.
Well, it's completely unacceptable. And it reminds me, I mean, Ben, you say that there are certain areas where, people can get together and express these views. And I think of Donald Trump giving his locker room banter about, doing certain things to certain women's anatomies. I mean, look, the reality is that kind of language should not be used in any forum anywhere. We need to move on. I do think we have made some advances, but as Aisha says, there's much further to go. I mean, the reality is that this is a national broadcaster. Ofcom's going to do an investigation, quite rightly, and you have to have certain standards. Now, if there was a conversation to be had about Ava's views about whether there should be a minister for men, for example, that's a legitimate conversation to have. And I think, Ava, you've had a little bit of a change of heart since you came on that programme. That's a legitimate question to have about male suicide and those things. You can't go around having any sort of form of debate in the way that Laurence Fox did on that programme. I have no desire to know who Laurence Fox wants to sleep with or not is completely inappropriate.
But also
frankly,
the other
in that
thing
environment.
about that, the question about a Minister for Men comes up often, and it is not a good faith question. If you want to have a conversation about the many challenges facing young men, older men, suicide rates, loneliness, etc., have that thoughtful discussion. The whole Minister for Men thing is wheeled out as a device to basically beat down on feminism, and its natural conclusion is what we saw with Laurence Fox and Dan Wootton.
But I'll say that I think there is a legitimate conversation to be had about why some men are in crisis and why we have male suicide.
Absolutely.
And do you know what? I think that's a really important question. Before I'm just going to say that is an important and separate issue. What was said to Ava is entirely unconnected, I believe, to that. You should... no one at any stage in response to any issue should be saying that because you don't agree with someone's points, that is anything to do with...
Of course.
I wouldn't go to bed with that person.
These people, they don't want to have a serious, thoughtful discussion about mental health, about male suicide, about what's happening with veterans. It always leads back to this very base thing. And you know what?
What was said was absolutely disgusting.
But the big thing, look, there's GB News on one side, there's Dan Wootten and the disgraceful behaviour of the pair of them, but this is a big moment for Ofcom, right? All eyes are on Ofcom. And if Ofcom does not step up to the mark, people are going to ask the question, what is the point of this regulator?
Well, let's put that to Ava, because, of course, I mean, you're at the centre of this, not by your own choosing. What do you feel needs to happen? What do you want to happen?
I wouldn't want to predict what should happen. I thought that was a good outcome already from GB News yesterday. I know that Ofcom have had quite a few complaints. I would just quite like it that there to be a precedent set here going forward with broadcasting where that is not acceptable. And I want other young producers who might have been sitting in the gallery to, you know, feel not empowered, that's a silly word, but maybe have the confidence to call that out in future and know that it's not acceptable for broadcasters to act like that.
And Ali, you were a former Conservative parliamentary...
A long time ago.
Candidate, a long time ago.
Many moons ago.
But what do you think about serving MPs being on the news channel? And as Ava says, she hasn't heard from any of those presenters. I don't know whether on other platforms they might have mentioned this, but the fact that they haven't disavowed those... Has he?
I think so, yeah, I think he has.
But Lee Anderson, for instance, is the deputy chairman of the party.
But look, Suzanne, let's be realistic, right? Lee Anderson is someone who tells people who come here on boats crossing the channel we can't use the language, but it begins with F and people can use their minds to work out what the word is, to go back to wherever they came. I mean, this is the kind of language being used by a frontline politician today. I mean, this is unacceptable. So the reality is, look, there are a couple of issues here. Firstly, MPs, I'd like to see them actually doing their day jobs more and actually being paid properly to do their day jobs and not doing this. But if they choose to do this, they should absolutely disassociate themselves from it. Look, I think GB News has got a place in British broadcasting. I've been on it in the past many times. They have a range of opinion, but that kind of behaviour by Laurence was completely unacceptable in any forum.
Another thing I think we've got to just take a step back from this. We have had the most horrendous epidemic of violence against women and girls in this country of late, from Sarah Everard. The stories go on and on and on. Words matter, and often these things are a spectrum, and it starts with language. Hate preaching, what Laurence Fox did, that's hate preaching against women. And it can end up in a really dark place. And that is why I would say every senior member of parliament who is involved in GB News has to really think on that.